course, that wasn't the only cost, although it was the most important one. But we also spent $32 billion on the war. Now, let me put that in perspective. The entire federal budget in the years before the war was usually around $1 billion. We spent $32 billion on the war. In 1910, the GDP of the whole United States was $35 billion. So how do we pay for this? Well, one way was Liberty bonds. You couldn't go anywhere in America without seeing propaganda like you see here. We sold $23 billion in Liberty bonds. And we did this largely with the help of what were called 4-minute men. These were people who would show up anywhere you might go. You might go to a high school football game, or you might go to a movie or a play or something, and somebody would stand up, ask for a minute of your time, and they would give these short speeches. Here's one. This is actually given by a woman. We're going to look over this in class if you're in my class. If you're not, you might pause it and read this and check this thing out. It is amazingly manipulative. But this is how we raised money. We also imposed a tax on corporations. We taxed what we called excess profit. There was a graduated income tax. The tax on the top bracket, on the highest amount of income, moved to 70%. It had started at 6%. We also imposed an inheritance tax on large fortunes when the owners of them died. All of this was done to pay for the war. These taxes had been very small, almost non-existent before, and now they're going to come in significant amounts. In 1916, the Council on National Defense created the Civilian Advisory Commission. Initially, they divided the country up geographically, but soon they divided it by industry. This was a government planning for production. They were running industries, producing stuff, and they created war boards. Herbert Hoover would become a great hero in America for overseeing the food board and making sure food got manufactured and distributed where the government decided they needed it to be. In World War I, we essentially abandoned capitalism and became a command economy. On July 17th, the War Industries Board was founded and coordinated military supplies. On March 18th, Wall Street financier Bernard Baruch is put in charge of that board. And he decides what factories will be converted to war production and have government contracts, and decides what factories won't. He sets prices, he distributes the goods, and he hands out the contracts to the companies. You can imagine he tends to help companies that he knows or is invested in. The War Industries Board is run by businessmen, and they did not take salaries from the government. They would take $1 salary as a token, and they were paid by their corporations. But it's worth pointing out their corporations usually benefited greatly through government contracts. The National War Labor Board pressured employers to give workers 8-hour days, equal pay for women, and pay raises. And they mandated that during the war, unions would be recognized. Now, why did they do this? Because they suddenly liked workers? No, they did this because they couldn't afford to have strikes. And so they say, we can't have workers quit working because we need the stuff for war, so we're just going to give the workers what they want. There was a belief that people had to support the war passionately in order for victory to be achieved. The Committee on Public Information, run by George Creel, controlled the information distributed to the media. They also distributed 75 million pieces of literature to try to get Americans to support the war more enthusiastically. They made movies. They put posters up all over the country. They urged self-censorship. And they asked people to turn in their neighbors if they believed that they were either supporting the Central Powers or if they expressed, quote, a yearning for peace. So if you were to say, man, I'm tired of this war, I wish it were over, then you were supposed to be turned into the government for being insufficiently supportive of the war. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sabotage and Sedition Acts of 1918 allowed the government to jail suspected dissidents, meaning people who were not enthusiastic enough about the war. If you criticized the government or the president at all, even if it was non-war related, that was a crime. So if you said, I don't really like the way that Woodrow Wilson handled this domestic issue that had nothing to do with the war, that became illegal. They used this to go after the unions. They used this to break up the Wobblies and to attack people who had joined the Socialist Party. In the same way today that, say, the Patriot Act passed after 9/11/2001 was used to attack vegetarian groups for some reason. My favorite story from this period is they arrest a man and throw him in jail for making a Hollywood film about the Revolutionary War. Now, what was the problem with this? Well, who's the bad guy in the Revolutionary War from the American perspective? It's the British. So they declared this movie about Washington winning the Revolutionary War to be anti-British propaganda, which is, of course, just crazy. Eugene V. Debs is sent to prison, just for a precautionary measure because he was the socialist candidate for president every time an election came around. And he'll stay there for 10 years until he's sentenced to 10 years, excuse me. He's sent in 1918, but he's pardoned by the government in 1921. He only has to spend 3 years in jail. The leader of the Wobblies, Big Bill Haywood, has to run away from the country. He has to flee America, and he goes to the Soviet Union because they'll take him in. 1,500 Americans ultimately are imprisoned as spies for simply being members of unions. This is a quote we'll go over in class, but you might pause it and read it. This is a pretty disturbing and I think shocking quote. Citizens groups root out disloyalty. They persecute Germans. There's a lot of anti-German sentiment in the way that after 9/11 maybe there was anti-Muslim sentiment. Most German Americans support the war, but the U.S. turns on all things Germans. Germans are fired from jobs simply because of their nationality. German books are banned. German classes are dropped from schools and universities. We encourage people to call sausage Liberty sausage instead of maybe bratwurst because that's a German word. And we changed the name of sauerkraut to Liberty cabbage. Again, this has echoes in our own times as we decided we were mad at the French and said we were going to call French fries freedom fries.